Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Can you please take your seats and we'll get this show on the road. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the June 22nd, 2011 public hearing of the Riverside County Planning Commission. Ms. Ray, would you please call the roll?
Good morning, Commissioner John Roth.
Here.
Commissioner John Snell.
Here.
Commissioner John Petty.
Here.
Commissioner Jim Porres.
Here.
Commissioner Jan Sapardo.
Here.
Thank you. Would you all rise and join me in a salute to our flag? Ready? Begin. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we'll go through the housekeeping items first. We need you to fill out a request to speak slip if you wish to address the commission today. Fill them out legibly and completely, and as I usually tell you, if you are legible, I'll try to pronounce your name correctly, and if not, you can correct me when you get here. Indicate whether you're in favor, whether you're in a neutral position, or whether you're in opposition. Given to Mr. Greg Neal, who is now walking off the stage here and will be in the lobby. Once again, turn off your cell phones or put them on vibrate. They'll interrupt the hearing and slow down the process. I'd once again like to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Kirk Howell and the board and pastor in this church for making this venue available so that it can be held in an area that is close to the project site. I have one other thing that I'm going to cover this morning, and it relates to some comments that I made in the first hearing. I'm going to try to explain this, and you can take it for what it's worth. I had said that clapping, cheering, booing would not, and in quotes, I have helped your cause. The statement was apparently interpreted as a threat as reported in several news articles. I can assure you it was not a threat. It was simply one of several attempts to control the hearing and move the process along. In addition, it was reported that at least one news source that the Planning Commission had been bought off by the applicant and somehow further opposition testimony would not be considered. I want to make it very clear that I am not and my colleagues on the commission are not for sale. Our duties are to listen to both the applicant's testimony and the opposition's testimony and evaluate the potential impacts to the surrounding community and Riverside County as a whole. The issues regarding analysis are covered in the environmental impact report and by expert and public testimony during the public hearings, and include items such as traffic and transportation, air quality, biological, noise, lighting, etc. This commission will consider all relevant testimony from the applicant and those in opposition, and each member of this commission will render an independent decision based on his or her understanding of the testimony presented. Finally, I'm going to repeat it. This commission is not for sale. The hearing process today, we're going to hear from experts supporting the opposition, followed by was not presented at the May 5th public hearing. The rules are the same as with earlier hearings, 2 minutes per speaker, with up to 4 individuals donating their time to the speaker for a total of 10 minutes. This time may be somewhat longer if a member of the commission wishes to question.
John Benjamin has a event tonight after South Park.
Assuming that all testimony is received, the hearing will close on June 2011 at 9 a.m. in the same venue. As a preview of that hearing, at the June 29th, 2011 hearing, we will accommodate the applicant's rebuttal, including any expert testimony by the applicant's consultants. And I would encourage the opposition's personnel who will be providing expert testimony tonight or today should attend the June 29th hearing in the event a member of the commission wishes to clarify the issue. The schedule for today is 9 to 12, we're going to hear opposition expert testimony. 12 noon to 1, we'll take a lunch break. 1 to 5, the opposition and expert testimony can continue if it's not over by before 12 noon, and we'll begin to work down the stack of public testimony. From 5 to 6, if it takes that long, we'll take a dinner break. From 6 to 9 then, we'll have more opposition expert testimony and public testimony as needed. At 9, we plan to close the public hearing to further public testimony and continue the hearing to June 29th. I'm going to say this once again, this is not a sporting event, and the commission would appreciate courtesy and respect for all persons providing testimony, regardless of whether or not you agree. Thank you for your attention, and we'll now have, I think, a brief staff report or some comments by staff, and then we'll begin the expert testimony.
Commissioner Roth,
Yes.
I thought it'd be appropriate to have a brief comment about, from Commissioner Porras and I, how we got up to speed on the last hearing, which we missed.
And that is appropriate, and somehow that went in one ear and out the other, but in the event, our council has talked with the Fair Political Practices Commission, and they have ruled that Commissioner Snell and Commissioner Porras are both allowed to participate in the hearings. And I believe that at least Commissioner Snell and possibly Commissioner Porras both viewed the streaming video of those hearings, of that hearing, and are able to testify today and comment. County Council, would you like to add anything to that?
No, Commissioner Snell or Commissioner Porras want to add in.
Just go ahead, Commissioner Snell.
I just wanted to add that I was able to watch the streaming video from the start of the hearing to the end of the hearing, and was able to hear everything and see everything that occurred in the hearing.
Thank you.
And same here.
Okay, so,
Mr. Chairman,
yes.
I would like to renew my objection to the format. At the last hearing, not Liberty Quarry hearing, but our last hearing a week ago today in Paris, Commission discussed how we were going to proceed from this point forward. I am not in favor of the public hearing being closed. I do not believe that we have heard the complete presentation from the applicant. The applicant made a tactical decision to do an abbreviated presentation at the beginning of these hearings. And I believe that the public should be entitled to hear the full applicant's rebuttal, continue its public testimony. It's not fair to those people who have diligently studied this issue, taking time out of their lives to come before us and contribute what I think so far have been very well thought out, cogent arguments. The applicant again has made a tactical decision to defer, I think, the bulk of its presentation to the rebuttal, and I am in favor of keeping the public hearing open. I know Supervisor Stone is also in favor of that process. I just wanted to make that for the record.
And just to clarify for Commissioner Petty and the rest of the commissioners and the audience, if we get through all public testimony today, then the commission has the option of closing the hearing to public testimony. If we do not get through all of public testimony, of course, the public hearing to public testimony will need to stay open. So we can make that as we go through the day. If we do get through all public testimony, the commission can close the public hearing to further public testimony. However, the public hearing will still remain open for all other matters, which include the applicant's rebuttal and any questions that the commission has and any responses from experts provided to the commission in response to the answers. So that would still be considered part of the public hearing, would still be included in the administrative record, and still would be considered by the commission.
Thank you, your comments are noted, Commissioner Petty.
Commissioner Roth,
Yes.
just a brief comment on that. I'm very open, once we get through the day, to discuss what we do next. I don't think it's appropriate really to talk as if it's been predetermined what will happen on the 29th or anything else. I think we need to get through today, see what happens, have discussion and a motion at the end of the day.
Well, and I appreciate that too, because I did not think that this commission should predetermine the schedule at the last hearing. So I appreciate County Council's comments, but the fact remains that right now, what the chair has just said was we're going to close the public hearing, and after the applicant's rebuttal testimony, the public will not be allowed. As of right now, what the chair is saying, the public will not be allowed further comment.
I believe what Commissioner Roth said was assuming we get all public testimony done, the hearing would be closed. So again, I think it's up to going through the entire day, figuring out where we are at in regards to public testimony, and then ultimately it is up to the commission to make a motion as to what they want to do.
Thank you, Council. We are going to do one thing that's a little out of the ordinary right now. We're going to reorder the public hearing and take this item 3.2, which is a plot plan that is only up for continuance. Is there any staff report on this?
No, sir, no, sir.
We have no staff report on item 3.2, which is plot plan number 22271 and change of zone number 7444.
Do we have any speaker slips, Mr. Chairman?
We have no speaker slips.
Then I guess the motion would be to accept staff's recommendation.
Second.
Do we have a date certain for that? It'll be August 24th.
So the motion would be to continue to August 24th. Is that correct? Is that your motion, Commissioner Petty?
Yes.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries 5-0. All right. We're going to now begin the testimony. First up, will be speakers from the city of Temecula. And the first speaker is Sean Nelson. Let me make sure that we have some other folks here. Is Susan Jones here?
Right here.
Thank you. Is Beth Gutierrez here? Okay. And Greg Butler? All right. Mr. Nelson, you have 8 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. My name is Sean Nelson. I'm the city manager for the city of Temecula, and it's been a wonderful honor and privilege for me to be a part of the city of Temecula for more than 20 years, which is why I'm so upset about the proposed Liberty Quarry project. In my opinion, Granite Construction has devised a massive political campaign designed to divide the leadership of elected officials in Riverside County, pitting certain areas in our county against one another to distort the truth and the facts. What they have done can be described in one word: deception. Deception is defined as the act of fraud or illusion, causing a false impression. In other words, being purposefully dishonest. Granite has an unlimited bankroll, and over the past 6 years has left no stone unturned and spent whatever money was required and lobbied every elected official in Riverside County that they possibly could to create the following deceptions, the following illusions. 1, that the citizens of Temecula are unwilling to do their part to support the regional economy. Anyone who knows anything about the city of Temecula knows that our community has grown 4 times in the last 2 decades, from 25,000 to over 100,000 people in our city. And our city council has an impeccable track record of making wise decisions that have created several tens of thousands in new jobs since our incorporation, and several millions of dollars in new revenues that have been injected directly into our local economy. It cannot be disputed in any way, shape, or form that the city of Temecula has been one of the most significant economic engines in all of Riverside County over the past 2 decades. We obviously support economic development. But there's also one other measurement that is most important to the people who live in the city of Temecula, and that is to preserve our quality of life so our citizens can live, work, and raise a family. The second deception is this alleged notion that you add 1,600 truck trips per day, and at the same time, you will somehow reduce 16.5 million miles per truck trips per year in the freeway. Common sense tells you that is impossible. This ridiculous assumption is one of the many deceptive statements made by Granite that our traffic expert will expand upon and expose this deception for what it is. Thirdly, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to talk about air quality. If you were to ask anyone who's lived in Temecula for any period of time, they will tell you that the #1 asset to living in this beautiful city, more than anything else, is our pristine air quality. It is the foundation of our quality of life for the citizens who live here, and it is also the main reason why so many private sector businesses have invested in Temecula, and so many tourists frequent the wine country in Old Town, making Temecula one of the most significant tourist destinations in Southern California. In fact, tourism generates over $600 million annually to our regional economy and creates over 6,000 jobs every year. And do you know why we have this amazing air quality? It is because of the wind corridor that comes through the Rainbow Gap, the Santa Margarita River watershed, that brings the winds in from the Pacific Ocean. It cools down our afternoons and keeps us free from smog. So what does Granite want to do? They want to place an open pit rock quarry with continual blasting for the next 75 years right in the middle of this wind corridor to create 99 jobs. Further, it's also located right next to an ecological reserve. I will submit to you that from a land use standpoint, this is the absolute worst location to place an open pit rock quarry. Which brings me to the final deception that I want to discuss this morning. Granite has stated for more than 6 years that they have a private property right to build this quarry. That is another deception that is absolutely not true. This project not only needs an open pit mining permit to be approved, but it also requires a change of zone. The Planning Commission has full authority to recommend denying this change of zone based upon the negative impacts of the EIR. This morning, you will hear expert testimony that will address the many and significant flaws of this EIR that relate to traffic impacts, water resources, economics, air quality, land use incompatibility, and the availability of existing aggregate, just to name a few. And further, we're going to provide a written packet of information to each commissioner that outlines all the key points that will be discussed by the city experts today. In conclusion, I believe today is a defining moment that will determine what Temecula will become for the next several decades and beyond. And I ask that you please consider the thousands of citizens in Temecula who are represented here today, who are not opposed to economic development, but rather believe with all their hearts that protecting our quality of life is of paramount importance, and in the process will ensure a brighter future for our children's children. I ask you to please vote no on the Liberty Quarry project. Thank you.
Next speaker is Peter Thorson. And is Grant Gates here? Thank you, Grant. You will have 4 minutes.
Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning Commission, my name is Peter Thorson. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Richards, Watson, and Gershon, and I've been the city attorney in Temecula for the past 17 years. City of Temecula has retained 4 experts to evaluate the impacts of the proposed quarry on southwest Riverside County. And in addition, our staff members have researched various issues relating to the proposed quarry. As you will hear today, these experts studied the proposed quarry and will present compelling evidence that the quarry will have a severe adverse impact on the region. The people of the city of Temecula presented this evidence to you in detailed letters dated November 23, 2009 and April 26, 2011. Despite 16 months of reviewing the work of these experts, Granite Construction has failed to rebut their conclusions. There are 3 general legal conclusions that arise from the analysis of these experts that will testify today. First, the evidence shows that the findings in support of the project are not supported by substantial evidence, as is clearly required by California law. Second, the evidence shows that the alleged benefits of the project do not outweigh the negative impacts, making it impossible for this commission and the county to adopt a statement of overriding consideration to allow the project to go forward despite its severe impacts. Third, the evidence shows substantial gaps in the most elementary analysis of the impacts of the project, again in violation of CEQA. Now, I am sure that Granite Construction will tell you that the city of Temecula is simply nitpicking the EIR with technicalities. And they will also tell you that a disagreement among experts is not a reason to invalidate the EIR. Not true. These experts will provide compelling evidence of the bad impacts on the proposed quarry will have on the region, including air quality, groundwater, noise, traffic, and economics. These impacts are not theoretical. These impacts are not just technicalities related to the EIR. These impacts are real-world problems that every resident and every business in the region, big or small, will have to cope with and try and overcome if the quarry is approved. Do not let Granite Construction lead you away from your fundamental responsibility that you need to address as planning commissioners. That what will happen to the residents and the businesses in Southwest County if the quarry is approved? That is the central question that is before you today. The City of Temecula has presented substantial evidence through these experts from which you can find that these impacts will be bad for the residents and businesses in Southwest County. The evidence that you will hear from these experts also forms the basis, substantial evidence, on which you can easily and fairly conclude that this project should be denied. Thank you.
David Snow. 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. I'm David Snow. I'm the Assistant City Attorney with the City of Temecula. As noted in the City's previous comments on both the draft and final versions of the Environmental Impact Report for the Liberty Quarry project, the City believes that the document is fundamentally flawed and fails to comport with the requirements of the California Environmental Quality Act. You will hear specific examples of this from the City's technical experts. I would like to remind the Commission of the important policies underlying CEQA's requirements. First, an EIR is to demonstrate to an apprehensive citizenry that the agency has, in fact, analyzed and considered the ecological implications of its actions. The final EIR presented to this Commission does not meet this burden because it does not adequately disclose the true impacts the project will have. Second, it is CEQA policy to take all actions necessary to provide the people of this state with clean air and water, enjoyment of aesthetics, natural, scenic, and historic environmental qualities, and freedom from excessive noise. As noted in the comments submitted by the City and others, this project does none of these things in light of the air, water, scenic, historic, noise, traffic, biological, cultural, and other impacts. Third, CEQA was intended to be interpreted in such a manner to afford the fullest possible protection to the environment within the reasonable scope of the statutory language. The EIR fails to disclose impacts and thus fails to consider mitigations or alternatives that would afford the fullest environmental protection. CEQA Guidelines Section 15002H lists various methods for protecting the environment. These include choosing an alternate way of meeting the same need, otherwise an alternate site, or disapproving the project, which is exactly what we urge this Commission to do.
Thank you. Janetta G. Yes, you have 2 minutes.
Good morning, members of the Planning Commission. Thank you very much. My name is Janetta Jovinko, and I'm also an Assistant City Attorney for the City of Temecula. I would like to focus on 3 brief points that highlight how the final EIR for this project fails to disclose to you, the decision makers, as well as the public, the true scope of the negative impacts that this project will have, and the EIR's failure to consider adequate alternatives. These failures render the EIR legally inadequate. First, the quarry would sever by nearly 100% the designated special linkage area of the MSHCP. The EIR fails to disclose the true scope of adverse impacts relating to this action and ignores the State Department of Fish and Game's comments that the proposed mitigation is not, quote-unquote, superior prevention. The EIR thus fails as an informational document. Second, the EIR at first failed even to include a water supply assessment, and then one was prepared at the very last minute. This document was not, however, included in the draft EIR, and there was no opportunity for public comment on it. This is another example of the failure to provide necessary information to the public as well as to your Commission. Finally, the EIR fails to consider a clearly feasible alternative that could meet the project's main objectives while reducing or avoiding significant adverse impacts associated with this site. Specifically, I am speaking of a site in San Diego County which was never analyzed. This deficiency is yet a third example of the legal inadequacy of the EIR. For all of these reasons, as well as those mentioned by other speakers, the EIR is legally inadequate, and we urge you not to approve this project. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, Commissioner Snell.
Thank you. I have a question for you. Are we going to hear more on the linkage severage, or are you the only speaker we'll hear on that?
I believe there definitely will be other speakers on that as well in far greater detail.
Experts?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, don't go away. I have a question also, and that is, you specifically mentioned a site in San Diego County. What is it?
I didn't mean a specific site, I meant the consideration of a site, meaning something in San Diego County. I wasn't referring specifically to something that I had in mind, but the consideration of something else in San Diego County.
For your information, I've asked our staff to identify the sites in San Diego County that might be used in lieu of Liberty Quarry, and I have not received the information yet, but I presume that it will show up in due time.
Thank you very much.
Manfred Keel. And let's see, we have 10 minutes, so let everybody here. Don Adamek. Don, you here? Thank you. Tracy Masters. Thank you. Dale West. Thank you. And Barbara Smith. Thank you. You have 10 minutes, sir.
Members of the Commission, I'm trying to set up the PowerPoint. It's Liberty Quarry.
All right, Desiree, don't start this time until we're set up and ready to go.
Good morning, members of the Commission. My name is Manfred Kyle. I'm a professor of economics and former chairman of the faculty at the Robert Day School of Economics and Finance at Claremont McKenna College. I received my PhD from the London School of Economics, and I'm a research associate at the Rose Institute of State and Local Government at Claremont McKenna. I'm also a research associate at the Low Institute, where we conduct the annual forecast together with UCLA's Anderson School for economic activity in various locations of Riverside and San Bernardino County. The Rose Institute was approached by the city of Temecula to analyze and comment on Granite's economic report. My co-author is Gary Smith, a professor at Pomona College with a PhD from Yale University. Looking at Granite's economic report, frankly, we are baffled by the analysis presented in the report, which we do not consider conforms to standard economic practice. Slide 2, please. This is a visual display of all the benefits that the Granite's economic report lists in tables on page 19 to 21 of their report. Just briefly going through them, the 5.3 million at the top and 27.3 million are the result of reduced truck traffic, both on air quality and highway maintenance. 9.2 is California sales tax and present value of California royalties. 1.1 million, the next item there, is increases in sales taxes and TUMF. The next item is 1.5, which refers to MSHPC fees and Riverside County Transportation Commission. Fees, 700,000 come from increases in property taxes. And then the big items are 18.7 million that are the result of outside household income impact and outside output impact. And the final item, the 20.9 million, is direct output impact. Our report that we wrote for the city of Temecula claims that these values are inflated and involve some double counting. In addition, they do not consider any costs that are associated with the various activities which would be standard in economic analysis. Since the report by Granite does not consider any costs, it's not surprising that the benefits, as they are, outweigh the costs. It is standard economic analysis that you only count income from employment and purchases of local goods and services as benefits to the regions. That would leave out of that entire column the bottom 19.5, which is not, which is substantial. It is just not what the report showed. We have considered each one of these items, and we feel that Granite's economic report actually shows, if you carefully read it, that truck traffic, if nothing else, would increase, if not decrease. That would eliminate the top 5.3 million and 27.3 million items. California sales tax and royalties are tricky, but they are there and will certainly not be among the benefits of the local residents. TUMF fees should be counted, but they should be counted in 2012 as one-time fees. And 2/3 of the deliveries of granite will go to San Diego County, not to Riverside County. And we've analyzed various ways that sales taxes will be appropriated there. It is not clear at all that much of the sales tax listed there will go to Riverside County, but instead will go to San Diego County. MSHC and Riverside County Transportation Commission fees are 1.1 million, as I said before. Again, there's restrictive use. These are one-time fees. They should be listed as benefits in 2012, not in 2021. Property taxes, an increase of 700,000. We feel that these will be overcome by lost value in property, private property, and perhaps even in commercial property. The big items at the bottom, the household income impact, direct and outside, of 18.7 million, involves double counting. It is already contained in the 21.9 million. We give the author the benefit of the doubt, listing both of these in summary tables on pages 19 and 21, when perhaps they meant to mean for this to look at it from different points of view. The big item there, 149.6 million, is a very tricky one. It assumes that all money that comes from the outside benefits the regional economy. This is as if you looked at the Hilton Corporation in Vegas and you assumed any money from the outside would benefit local residents of Las Vegas, instead of just the money that is being spent there. So any transfer of profits back to Watsonville will be part of these 149.6 million, and therefore we don't consider them to be appropriate, which, as I said, leaves the 21.9 million. We adjust this in a very small amount by really restricting our analysis on local spending. And then, click please, that leaves us with 19.5 million, which is close to their 21.9 million. Next, please. We then consider various costs, which the Granite report did not consider at all. And in all of these calculations, we assumed very conservative values. As a matter of fact, for sensitivity analysis, we looked at a range of losses. And this one here assumes that all properties in Temecula will lose 6% of their value. We also have performed a minimum and maximum calculation. The minimum is 2% and the maximum is 10% on half of the houses. Next, please. We've considered the impact on tourism. Again, we assume here a decline of 10% as a result of the quarry. Our minimum assumption is 5% and our maximum assumption is 15%. Next, please. For agricultural losses, we have looked at a loss of 5% in the value of wine and 1% in the value of other crops. Our minimum assumption is 2.5% and 0.5%, and our maximum assumption is 7.5% and 1.5%. Next, please. The final item is on transportation costs. Altogether, we simply have assumed that per car, you will increase travel time by 1 minute per person per day. We've valued their time at $10 an hour, which is $2 above California minimum wages. We've also made different assumptions there, reducing it to 75 cents and $1.50. Next, please. If you add these items together, and property values, by the way, is not included there because it would occur once and for all in 2012 at the beginning of the mine, so these are not included there. But if you include the three areas that we looked at and the minimum, mid-range, and max, then these are the costs that are displayed there. Click next, please. This would be the driving cost, which is added to tourism, and finally, agriculture. Next, please. We have added together all the benefits and the costs, and for the year 2021 alone, in the mid-range, the costs would outweigh the benefits by 60.8 million. Under our assumption of the minimum impact, it would still outweigh it in 2021 by 24.6 million. Next, please. This is a display of the benefits, which we've basically taken the benefits from the economic report of Liberty, and then the costs together with the minimum assumptions and the maximum assumptions. Final slide, please. These are the costs and benefits for the year 2021 in the mid-range. As I said, 19.5 million in benefits from the quarry that we accepted as true benefits that result from that to the people of Temecula, and 80.3 million as a cost. We've also calculated for the entire lifespan of the quarry all costs and all benefits, and have discounted them back to 2012. This is called present value calculation. So this allows you to take all costs and benefits into account. And so this would be, for the lifetime of the quarry, the total benefits would be 357.7 million, with a cost of setting that by 1.5 billion. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question, Mr. Speaker.
Commissioner Snell.
If I could. Quite a few things, actually. First of all, we know there's professional methods and standards to produce these studies versus what you truly believe. Is there a difference between the two on this, or is this your fair assessment of what is really going to end up at the end?
No, I would sign off on the analysis that we did.
Again,
there is, let me perhaps add to it. My understanding is that in a previous hearing, there was someone from Wheeler who testified that there was no impact in Napa Valley and in the Coachella Valley on the quarries having effect either on tourism and property value. If you look at the charts that they present, it is actually quite interesting because they show property values sort of took this inverted U shape. They rose in 2000 and then came down. And so did quarry activity. And from that, they actually suggest that there's a positive correlation between quarry activity and property values. I don't think that passes the straight face test. A more careful analysis of their data, though, will show that both quarries in Napa and in Coachella Valley are not blasting, and certainly not blasting twice a day. They're scraping. On top of it, Napa Valley is a much bigger area in terms of wineries, so that one quarry there does not have the same effect as it would here. So I agree with you. Obviously, one can disagree in terms of certain aspects of the analysis, but I certainly sign off on this one.
and then on the property values, what was the basis for those numbers you gave? How'd you get to those numbers?
Yeah, so there was a previous analysis done for the Soul Dead quarry, much smaller quarry. And the assumption there was that within a 2-mile radius, property values would go down by between 6 and 10%. And within the 2 to 3.5 mile radius, they would go down by 1 to 6%. So there is no analysis that has been done, no academic analysis on a quarry of this size that is proposed. So we could try to do this in more detail, but this would involve a lot of additional work. And so what we simply did is we assumed that half of the houses in Temecula will be impacted. And we then chose the 3 ranges that are indicated. So the middle value, the mid-range was 6% loss of property, and there was a low end of 2% and a value of 10%. So we wanted to give the commission a range in terms of sensitivity analysis, saying, okay, so we assumed 6%, perhaps you don't find this reasonable, perhaps we should just go with 2%. But it must be clear that people are concerned about property loss, otherwise they would move to areas where there is a quarry, or they wouldn't care. I mean, that doesn't make sense.
Oh, there's no question, it's good to explore it, and I want to have a feel for how those numbers came to be. And so if we look back at the Soledad case, did that get constructed, and was there a look back at what actually happened on the values, or we don't have a projection versus a look back?
Yeah, there was no follow-up analysis.
Okay. And then the other assumption that you made is that that would be a constant, it would happen once and stay depressed, I guess, and follow the economic cycle down. It seems to me that if the quarry is the reason for the depreciation of property value, that would be based on the impacts. And as the quarry goes through different phases, initial startup is going to be small, mid-range, economy's roaring, it's going to be a lot bigger. It seems that the impacts of property value would fluctuate as the impacts fluctuate.
Yeah.
If there are, I think it's a lot more, it seems to me it would be a lot more than a perception that the quarry's there versus the real impacts.
Yeah, so what we could have made this more complicated, assuming at different stages of the quarry, perhaps when it comes up to full production in 2021, that more value would be lost. But presumably, the housing market does take future developments into account. So we felt that this was a once and for all cost, and hence it was not included. It is included in the present value, but it is not included in the calculations for 2021.
And exploring it, I can see why it's kind of a projection and just a demonstration rather than a hard economic analysis. Thank you.
Sorry.
Okay, go ahead. Be my guest.
Dr. Kyle, you talked about sales tax, and I'm interested in, I think you mentioned that with deliveries to San Diego, that sales tax revenue may adhere to San Diego versus Riverside or Riverside County. Can you expand on that?
Yes, so we had some analysis done on this. There are various scenarios that play themselves out. From what we understand, is that if a truck comes up to the quarry here and it is not owned by Granite and they purchase the aggregate, then the sales tax will go to Riverside County. If, on the other hand, Granite has a project in San Diego County, a construction project of its own, or if it delivers trucks to a site in San Diego County and the aggregate is sold there, then no sales tax will go to Riverside County, but to San Diego County instead. That is the short of it. There are many more complicated cases in between. All that we try to say is that in the that was presented by Granite, it took simply into account what their projections are given other sites that they have. But this is a very special site because of its geography. It is so close to San Diego County, where most of the expansion will occur in the future, we think. And so we didn't think that that was properly taken into account.
So that could dramatically affect the sales tax projections.
Yes.
I'm wondering, and this may be on the scope of what you were charged to do, but has anybody analyzed other quarry operations in terms of tipping fees and what they commonly generate in terms of tipping fees? Because I'm not sure staff has mentioned this, but I did not see in any of the materials that anybody has assumed tipping fees on this project. Is that true? Anybody from staff also want to?
There are no tipping fees assumed.
So Mr. Jones is our county geologist and the point person. He said no tipping fees have been assumed. Dr. Kyle, does your experience indicate that that's typical, or?
To tell you what we were asked to do is we were asked to look at Dr. Husing's report, and Dr. Husing's report only listed the benefits, and we looked at the benefits as they were listed there. I think our entire analysis on costs would have been even more specific if the quarry had considered potential costs, then we could have looked at them. But there was nothing in Dr. Husing's report on tipping fees either.
I can imagine from their standpoint, they probably just want to not mention that as a possibility. All right, thank you.
Yes, I had a question. If you had to identify the factors that lowered property values, what would you name as maybe the top 3 values? Is it just because the quarry is there, or?
Additional people moving to the area and purchasing these houses. There would be fewer of these people, I would assume, who would come. If they came, I would assume that, given that I look at the price of a house sort of as all future pieces of satisfaction you get from it, that would be lower, and as a result of that. And there would be some people, presumably, who might even consider moving away because of various health reasons, and so that would increase decrease the supply.
Okay, health reasons. Any others? Noise?
No.
None of them. Okay, so primarily from a health standpoint.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question with the noise. I would assume, hearing blasts of the magnitude that you would hear twice a day, that would make it less desirable to either buy a house to come here, or if you're here, you might consider moving away.
Okay, second question is, I don't recall seeing your report. Does the commission have access into the report?
Absolutely.
All right. Okay. Any other questions? Supporters?
I would like a copy of your report.
Absolutely. We submitted the final version last night. I believe Ms. Lowry has made copies, and I'm actually surprised you haven't received them. I assume you will receive them today.
Commissioner Zavardo? Okay. Does your report contrast with or without Liberty Quarry against Dr. Husing's information that he provided to us?
Absolutely. So we focus specifically on Dr. Husing's report, and we compare the figures. None of these slides are in there. They're here just for presentation, but the numbers are certainly in there. We also make our case of why we think the Husing report emphasizes that there will be reduced truck traffic, and why we think that that is not consistent with information they give at other parts of the report. So we detail that here, which in 10 minutes I cannot do.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next, we have Carrie Cato. And let's see, is Jeannie Roberts here? Thank you. David Bilby. Thank you. Heidi Schrader. Thank you. Stuart Fisk. Thank you. We have 10 minutes.
Members of the Planning Commission, my name is Dr. Carrie Cato. I'm licensed to practice geology in California and represent the city of Temecula on geology, groundwater, and mineral resource issues. I have evaluated engineering projects for 25 years, 16 of these in Southern California. We submitted over 70 detailed comments to the draft EIR, but today I address two topics: aggregate resources and groundwater. The first topic is aggregate resources. Point number one, there is no aggregate shortage in Riverside County. The county is a major aggregate exporter to Orange, Los Angeles, and San Diego counties. California Geologic Survey, map sheet 52, states that southwestern Riverside County is a major aggregate exporter. It distinguishes between areas of high need, like west central San Diego County and Orange County, versus major aggregate producers, like Riverside County. Map sheet 52's 50-year availability forecast unfortunately underestimates future production in areas like Temescal Canyon, where the majority of mine permits have an average duration of under 30 years. They simply weren't counted. Number two, aggregate production will continue in Riverside County because there are abundant resources for new mines, and the county's existing mines are continually revised and re-permitted. Granite construction creates a false impression that, quote, Riverside County will run out of aggregate and 13 mines will close by the year 2030, unquote. That just marks a point where many of the existing permits will have expired. But renewing mine permits is the industry standard for continuing a mine's production and increasing reserves. The EIR assumed when permits expire, the mine closes. The county geologists confirmed these 13 mines are always open for a revision to extend the time limits and/or increase the volumes if that is found to be appropriate. Riverside County has an excellent track record of revising mine permits, and its website states, quote, it is easier and less complicated to revise the permit than to start over from the beginning. Renewing is relatively fast. For example, one mine applied in 2006 and was approved in just over a year, in 2007, and it revised production from 34.5 million tons to 105 million tons. It is safe to say that the largest aggregate district in the United States, just north of Temecula, with significant defined MRZ3 and MRZ2A aggregate reserves, will not dissolve in just 19 years. Point three, next slide. The Liberty Quarry location is inappropriate in terms of hauling distance. The proposed mine would be located between two distinct and disconnected aggregate consumption areas, San Diego to the south and Riverside County to the north, with many miles between these aggregate demand areas. The low aggregate consumption area in between has very low predicted growth. To the north, the majority of new developable areas, and these are the darker areas on the map that represent the highest growth areas through 2030. These begin 10 to 15 miles away from Liberty Quarry, areas very well served by the largest aggregate district in the United States. Liberty Quarry would either take business from these mines already serving these developing areas or create additional truck impacts along the way to this market, and with no mitigation. Both scenarios are likely to happen. To the south, aggregate will have to be hauled 20 miles just to reach the south market area, but then transported another 30 to 40 miles to fully service this area. But if you note on this map, the highest growth areas in San Diego County are located south of their market area. Hauling to these high demand areas would create even more I-15 impacts, something that was not studied in the EIR. Next map. So let's look south, where tremendous aggregate resources exist in San Diego County. This is where Liberty Quarry will haul 70%, and more realistically, as much as 85% of its production. San Diego County's aggregate shortage is simple. They don't want mines. Unlike in Riverside County, where aggregate production exceeds the county's local demand. The dark red color on this map is from the January 2011 SANDAG report, and it shows the extensive hard rock resources such as granite and granodiorite that exist all over San Diego County. Next slide. Further, the SANDAG report identifies numerous areas, and these are the light yellow, orange, and red on the map, where resources could be developed. San Diego County has realized it must work on internal, local solutions to develop aggregate supplies close to consumption areas, not 50 miles distant like Liberty Quarry. In fact, Liberty Quarry would haul its production 30 to 40 miles south and likely further into San Diego's developable areas. This would deter San Diego County from finding a local solution near the southern demand areas. If Liberty Quarry is constructed, it is clearly more appealing to San Diego's political environment to have the impacts located in Riverside County than to impact San Diego County's habitat closer to their own demand. This violates Liberty Quarry's own rule that it is cost prohibitive to haul aggregate more than 25 miles. But clearly, Liberty Quarry will be hauling most of its production, much greater distances than to service demand areas all over western and southern San Diego County.
I have a question. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I missed. Did you say that San Diego needs to realize they need a local solution? They are now realize. I missed.
I think historically they have, and there is conflict, obviously, in San Diego County, but the SANDAG, the government authorities there, have realized that they need to develop these aggregate resources, and that just came out in January of this year.
Okay, thank you. Sorry,
so I think there is a changing mindset. The bottom line, Liberty Quarry will deter San Diego from resolving its own aggregate crisis and creates the negative impacts of adding truck miles over the long run. Point 5, the EIR strategically selected San Diego locations to immediately reject and then purposefully omitted other viable San Diego alternatives. The EIR did not evaluate any location south of Liberty Quarry in depth or in good faith to find an alternative location closer to the demand in San Diego County. The alternative selection process was grossly inadequate. Now I want to move on to my second major topic of groundwater. Next slide. Point 1, the quarry will not behave as an unbroken bowl of rock with water unable to enter or exit the quarry. These are identical aerial photographs, with one on the right showing the extensive faults and fractures that crisscross the site and control groundwater flow. Clearly, there are pathways for groundwater to flow through the mountain. Next slide. We also know that water is in the mountain. Groundwater was encountered in every borehole that explored for groundwater. The project's hydrogeology study entirely characterized this groundwater as minimal and occurring as isolated pockets, concluding that off-site water supplies would not be affected. However, it is critical to understand that these tests were fundamentally flawed. Refer to the right diagram. The vertical discontinuities were explored using vertical boreholes that were located away from the fractures in relatively unfractured rock. Well, two vertical features will never intersect. The cross-section shows the distance that one of the boreholes was located from the fracture zone. And their own data in this hole shows that water occurs in areas where it was not expected, in unfractured bedrock. However, the real water conduits, the fractures and faults, were never explored, never sampled, and never tested. In addition, the off-site monitoring sites were not located on the same fractures as the pumping wells. The testing conducted was entirely inadequate and wholly inappropriate to draw the conclusions that there is no connectivity in the mountain's groundwater system. Next slide, point 4. So what happens to this 1,000-foot deep pit during mining, and once the mining stops? Well, as the hole is deepened, it drains the surrounding mountainside, dewatering it to create a dead mountain effect. The pit fills with contaminated mining water, and the mine will have to pump out. In 75 years, once mining stops, the pit will keep draining the mountain and a quarry lake forms at the bottom. The effects of this hydraulic head created by, 100, maybe a 400-foot deep body of water was never evaluated. The do-nothing option of pretending this pit won't dewater the mountain and that a quarry lake will not form is a gross oversight. What's more, the fractures in the lower portions of the quarry occur in fresh rock and are open pathways for the transport of water and pollution off-site. Allow this 1,000-foot deep excavation and it will effectively dewater the mountain. There will be long-term adverse impacts to the groundwater, including water wells, smur, vernal pools, vegetation, and to the Santa Margarita River. This is an inappropriate location for the mine, and I urge you to reject this application.
Start on the end, Commissioner Snell.
Thank you. First, I want to start back. You had numerous comments on the EIR draft. How do you characterize the response to those comments?
I think for things like the site impacts on the groundwater, they basically said there would be no impact. They've taken a line that it is a bowl of rock and there would be no water entering the quarry. And I think that is, it just does not look at the facts. There could go on, but that's basically how I characterize a lot of them, is they pretty much have stuck to their line.
And then, how would you test the fractures? They avoided them. I'm just wondering what you would do.
Well, you would put boreholes in the same fracture zone would be the first thing that you would do, and you would measure the water that's there, and then you would pump one well and look at its effect on the other well. But they need to be in the same zone. If one of them, say, is you've got a well over here, or you're pumping well, but you've crossed a fault zone and you're monitoring it over here, well, those are different hydraulic compartments. So you have to, in a bedrock aquifer, the bedrock itself is low permeability, so the water is in these discontinuities. So you have to make sure that your testing apparatus is sampling from those, and you want to, first of all, look at that. Then you might want to move away. But 3 boreholes just were not enough, and they weren't in the proper location. The other thing that occurred is that when they tested them, they violated all types of procedures, just in terms of the mechanism of the test itself. So I think that was totally flawed.
Now, would you want to actually map how all of those systems flow, or just to get a sense that they do flow and that they are connected? Because I could see that it could get a little ridiculous. Because it doesn't seem that it's a straight line. If you do have these breakups, one pump might affect 4 other areas, and not the one you expected, those kind of things.
Right. I think that you hit it off. First of all, you would map these out in much more detail. You have to differentiate the fractures that generally transport the water versus the faults that may or may not transport the water. You have to determine what are the faults. Their study did not differentiate that. At best, we just had a linear map and we kind of grouped all of these together. So that, first of all, just the aerial mapping, I think, was very low. But then we have models to basically construct that to try and, once you get some good field data, then you put that into a quantitative model to try to model what's going on in the field, and that was not done.
And then just another point, said that vertical lines won't intersect. I've never found faulting to be that neat and nice. It's not vertical, it's not horizontal, it does what it wants to do. And what you see at the surface may be quite different from what actually occurs under the ground. So I guess I take exception to that they're all straight vertical.
That's basically what they concluded in their study, and I agree with you that it is rarely that nice and neat, and it is much more complex. That's why we draw geologic cross sections to look at what's going on. That was very, at best, very rudimentary, and I think that certainly is part of your modeling to try and look at that 3-dimensional architecture. That just was never attempted.
And then you've proposed that they would end up with a dead quarry lake, and it would have head, push water and pollutants out. What pollutants do we expect to be pushed out into the groundwater and other areas?
Well, I think sediment is one, and that's something that would be loaded with nitrates, and different types of dust. There are some potential, I would say minor amounts of petroleum contaminants that would come from the truck. I think mainly nitrates and sediment.
And then, okay, I hadn't thought of that, but then just you're releasing things that have been in the soil now, they're free to export, and it could be arsenic, it could be anything, yes.
It depends on what's in the rock, and I don't think that was ever looked at. But I think one of the biggest things is that once you get down, say beneath, I don't know, 100 feet at this site, you start to get into fresh rock. Well, there are fractures that continue all the way down to 1,000 feet. Some of those were very open. So that's a difference, is that their ability to transport is much greater. And certainly if you start to intersect a fault now, fractures tend to be much more local than maybe a fabric, but the faulting, which there are some on site, those tend to go off site and can have a much greater off site effect.
Thank you.
Let's go down here with Commissioner Forrest. We'll go the opposite direction. Commissioner Forrest.
I would like to ask staff, county geologist, Mr. Cato says that the analysis by using the boreholes and relying upon that in itself is flawed, and that the county should have incorporated the fracture analysis that he was just referring to. Did the county include that, or do you have a comment regarding his comments?
The county did indeed have fracture analysis.
You need to get closer to this.
Oh, not too close.
The study absolutely did include fracture
Mike,
analysis.
sounds like it's dead. Dave, no, it's not.
Yeah, the study absolutely did include fracture analysis, fault analysis. There's cross sections, the borings that were placed were intended to follow and intersect these fractures. I'm not a hydrogeologist, but the data that was included in these analyses adequately supported their conclusions.
Okay, I'm going to be looking at that a little bit more carefully, because intuitively what Mr. Cato seems to say, if this wasn't done or it was flawed, kind of seems to make sense. But if the analysis was done, you're saying that it was sufficient to support that this would not be occurring in migration, as the development of the project would not allow for the migration of the water.
That's what the analysis concluded, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Petty.
Well, I do want to talk about your comments on the supply, but let's continue on with this groundwater issue. I want to kind of paraphrase it and boil this down to its essential components. The applicant is basically saying it's a rock hole and it's not going to leak. Okay? You're saying that there's all sorts of potential for leaking, that not enough boreholes were drilled to do an adequate analysis, and that what you would recommend is a much more in-depth, no pun intended, analysis and more boreholes and sounds like a different protocol of doing those boreholes. Is that a fair statement?
Well, I don't know if it would be a different protocol, but certainly I looked at this as kind of like a phase one that kind of prematurely got stopped, and I would want to take that then to a much more extensive evaluation. For example, I would want to know, if you did have a quarry lake that would form, I would want to know what its impact would be on I-15, because there's a very thin body of rock between the bottom of the quarry and I-15. Probably less than 1,000 feet. So what is the transport mechanism going to be just for that? We know that just to the north of this quarry, we have a fairly major landslide. Okay, now there are no landslides identified on site, but now we put this hole in the ground, we could have landslides, but also anytime you put water, you start to induce different forces. And that's certainly one of the things you look at in a slope stability analysis, is the effect of water on that. So this could go on. Yeah, it is.
Let's talk about supply for a second. I was very interested in your comment about Granite's analysis And there are assumptions that all of these 13 mines that you have identified to the north essentially shut down when their permits expire. Temecula City Manager Sean Nelson started his presentation by saying that one of his biggest objections, and I know this to be the case, is that other cities in Riverside County have been told that they're growing and they're not going to have adequate aggregate supply. And that's one of the reasons they need to support this project. It would make a huge difference if I found out that your statement is correct, that the permits are going to expire. The aggregate is not going to expire, if you will. If you got an idea or an estimate of how much aggregate there is in those 13 mines that we're talking about permits expiring, so is there a ballpark number in terms of tons, in terms of years of supply, in terms of whatever that you could provide the commission?
Just off the top of my head, I don't have that, but we did, when we were working on the Temecula's annexation, we came up with an analysis of that. So let me get back with you on the actual numbers. But I will say that if you just look at the mapped areas of the MRZ3 and the MRZ2A, there's quite a bit of that up in the Lake Elsinore and Temescal area. Now, and I also go on to talk about those are more consistent with what that land use is. And I think that's a very important point because I attended a state mining and geology board meeting that was held in Lake Elsinore less than, I believe it's about a month ago.
On the Pacific aggregate and some other
Right. And it was quite interesting to see there the support at the city of Lake Elsinore for the mining at that, and the historic. I mean, that goes way back. And I remember Supervisor Buster's comment at one of the annexation hearings where he spoke specifically on this, in that they have tried to maintain a protection for that area so that mining could continue. And that just seems to me to be one of the big things. That's a consistent historic land use, whereas here at this site, this gets into this kind of appropriateness question, whereas at this site, it is predominantly an environmental site. So, in an open space site, so there is the consistency in that land use.
Let me talk for a minute about, or ask the question of going further south to supply San Diego's needs. I don't know if this is in your expertise or not, but what if there's any viability of supply from Mexico?
There is, to some extent. There's not a lot that comes across the border. There's some of it comes by barge, very small amount, and some there was one conveyor. I think it was like under 500,000 tons a year is what we looked at. There's also some that comes in from out of the country, from British Columbia, and that actually has a much larger amount. But for the most part, though, everything else is coming from the mines in San Diego County or from Riverside County.
All right, thanks.
Commissioner Arnold, again. Okay, don't go away. You said that the mines in the Temescal Canyon were not counted. Is that accurate?
Well, they weren't.
Not at all?
No, that they were counted initially, but when you look at a 50-year forecast, then it shows that production is declining as, and they did the same thing. They were not counting mines as their permits expired. So they assumed that none of those then were going to be re-permitted.
Okay, hold on a second. Mr. Jones, do we have any that are in the permitting stage at this present time?
In the Temescal Canyon, I believe we do not have any that are applying for an extension. There's one operation that has visited county to consider redevelopment of their operation. It will include an increase in their reserves and will extend their life. The ultimate desire on that is also to use it as an inert debris landfill, but we have no application for us yet.
What is the nearest expiration date that you can recall now that's going to happen in Temecula?
We have one mine that has expired and has been in, say, a bit of a negotiation back and forth to get it re-permitted. That is off of Cajalco Road. The other mines in and around the Tom's Farm area, I think the closest one, and I don't know for a fact, is probably around 2020.
Okay, so they're good for another 8 or 9 years, and it sounds like, before anything would expire.
Right, and all of these operations are both given an expiration date and a production expiration, and that's based on the amount of permitted reserves that were allowed. So some of these mines may run out of material before their expiration date, or they may not. That's the market demand. The map sheet 52 that the state prepared used certain parameters, made certain projections, just like Dr. Cato is stating, and those are the data that were applied into our analysis.
Okay, thank you. On your map that you showed earlier, you want to comment on it?
No, I think that your questioning was appropriate in that you have to look at the life cycle of those individual mines and where they are in their permits, and instead of just drawing a number like 2030, I think it's a process that, and these are much smaller operations that are permitted on a 20 to 30 year basis at the most. I think there was only one mine up there that had a greater than a 50-year permit duration. So they're not large corporations.
Right, a lot of them are kind of family owned, if you want to look at it that way. On your map that you had up here, you had a category of unclassified in San Diego County. What, pray tell, does that mean to us? And how does it get classified?
Presently, a area would be classified by the applicant-driven process, just like granite construction did. Historically, though, that's not the way that the California Geologic Survey operated. I think they changed back in about 89 or so. And so most of the maps that you see that have any aerial extent, they would classify larger areas in the county as an MRZ2 or MRZ3A, and that's no longer done. And so, and I think that it's realized that that was probably anticipated to continue, and that just stopped. So, and that's unfortunate for counties and cities right now, because it really does need to be done. And so, you have these large areas in San Diego County that are unclassified, that if you did classify them, they would be MRZ3s. And so that's what SANDAG was realizing, that you need to include this. The applicant did not consider any of the unclassified areas at all in Riverside County or in San Diego County. They ruled them out.
Who does the classification then, if there is one done? USGS?
No, it's the CGS. The applicant goes to them, and there's a process by which you say, hey, we want to classify this area, and there's a fee, and then that information is turned over to somebody within the CGS, and then they make that classification. It's usually released as a publication.
Okay. You said in the EIR essentially there has been some selective evaluation of the mines down there. Can you comment on that?
Well, one of the figures that I did not use was I used the SANDAG map as a basis, which showed those areas, which was the same map that I showed here. But then I put on there the 4 areas that granite construction considered. And one of those was in the Fallbrook area. Another was along the San Luis Rey River. Then there were 2 mine sites like Twin Oaks and National Quarries. And once you look at that, you see that those are very site-specific areas. And there were many more areas that could have been considered.
And I had one other observation. Commissioner Petty and I toured the area with Ron of San Diego State and Paul Macaro of Changa. And at that time, we were interested in the flow of water through the canyon. And I think Matt had indicated there was a agreement with Rancho California Water District to provide some 3 gallons a minute because they were taking water from upstream of the ecological reserve. But the measurement of the water flows actually through the canyon was probably 5 or 6, a higher flow rate than was actually being put in upstream. Does that indicate that there is seepage into the Santa Margarita River?
Absolutely.
So, well, if this lake were there, then would the lake continue to seep into the Santa Margarita River? And if so, what might be the impacts of it?
Well, I think I think that needs some study to say that, because I think there's like an 8,000 foot difference, if I remember Gary Johnson's slide that he had that showed a cross section. I don't think that you can definitely say that a lake there, or the 75-year duration where you are lowering the groundwater, which would then stop that flow into the river. Okay, so you would probably reverse any flows. So I think that's the other thing to look at. You don't know. And I think that both are valid questions.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we've exhausted you now. Christopher Gray. You would have 8 minutes. Rudy Graciano. Jonathan Hall. And Julie Etier. Thank you. 8 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Chris Gray. I'm a transportation and traffic consultant with over 15 years' experience. My work has included the preparation of traffic studies from using CEQA documents and also to review traffic studies prepared by others. I wanted to come to you today to speak to you about the truck trip reduction and our serious reservations about how this analysis was done. Similar to the other experts retained by the city, we also provided numerous written comments on the draft EIR, but instead of taking our time to catalog those, we wanted to simply focus on what we consider to be one of the most critical issues related to the project, which is the truck trip reduction. This potential truck trip reduction is offered as a primary benefit of the project. This reduction was noted in reports prepared by the applicant's traffic engineer, cited in the EIR, and referenced in multiple promotional materials prepared by Granite Construction. Clearly, this truck hypothetical reduction has turned out to be a central theme in the overall project review. I'm here to tell you that for such a critical issue, the analysis is severely flawed such that we would urge you to reject the truck trip reduction studies. Our review of the analysis indicates that there are significant issues with the overall methodology, approach, and data. I will discuss each of these in detail. The first and most important flaw is the overall methodology. The reduction is based on counts of trucks with no attempt to determine the origin and destinations of these vehicles. The appropriate methodology for a project of this scale would be to match and track license plates, which is an approach that is commonly done in industry and origin destination studies. The problem with the methodology used in the hypothetical truck reduction analysis is that without an idea where aggregate trucks begin and end their trips, you cannot possibly calculate any reduction. The analysis instead is simply based on assumption after assumption. For example, it presumes all trucks at Liberty Quarry are displacing trucks traveling to and from San Bernardino quarries. How is it they can claim that Liberty Quarry will save over 1,200 truck trips all the way to and from San Bernardino when the only truck count they provided any data suggests at most 400 trucks could have passed through that location? That's just one example. For an issue that is central to the project, we cannot fathom why the analysis was done in the way it was when utilizing an impartial and precise license plate tracking method, which is standard protocol in our field, was not used. The second major flaw relates to the lack of comparable sites for the truck trip reduction. The standard approach for calculating a vehicle miles traveled, or VMT reduction for a project, is to compare a proposed site to other potential sites. In this case, that might include sites in San Diego County where most of the aggregate would be consumed. The industry standard approach was not applied here, though it could easily have been. The final major flaw of the truck reduction study is the data itself. The reports prepared by the applicant's traffic consultant note that traffic counts were taken originally in 2004. However, this data was not used as collected. The data was adjusted upwards, and assumptions were made to increase the truck counts. You can see from this illustration how the truck counts dropped dramatically from their original counts collected in 2004, shown in blue. They ultimately chose the highest numbers in green, which were adjusted based on a single count at their site for one day, the 2,461. Instead of collecting counts at locations they counted before, they simply conducted a count, which resulted in the numbers in green. We were able to obtain traffic counts done by a third-party traffic counting firm, which are shown in red, which were collected in 2009, which show actual counts of aggregate trucks located in the corridor. Our significant concern is that instead of collecting new data along the way, as conditions might have changed, they simply used inflated assumptions and again, didn't rely upon license plate tracking. This reduction in truck travel is being relied on the regional air quality and the alternative selection of a reduced footprint being environmentally superior. For the county staff to anticipate this reduction in truck travel will occur is particularly problematic since the traffic section of the EIR, which represents the traffic aspects of the project, concluded that the truck trip reduction was not applicable. There is a lack of adequate in-depth analysis of viable San Diego alternative locations. And this hypothetical truck trip reduction is based on far-reaching assumptions not supported by industry standards and procedures. We would note that even with this, the truck reduction is discussed throughout the EIR, the response to comments, and the marketing materials produced by Liberty Quarry. Therefore, there are serious flaws in the truck trip reduction studies. Some questions we want to leave you with are, if this issue is so important, why was it not studied in detail? Why was no effort made to track the truck trips with industry standard license plate tracking technology and determine where these truck trips really go? Why didn't the study compare the Liberty Quarry site against other potential sites in San Diego County or other locations to accurately estimate the truck mile reduction? Why did the study have to adjust count upwards when new counts could have been taken? In the end, why not simply take new counts? Thank you for your time.
Commissioner Petty.
Well, obviously, you've hit on a major issue here, and I've wondered the same thing. Is it your understanding that the applicant had somebody stand by and use a clicker, and did they click bottom dumps? Did they click truck and trailers? Do we know, what's your understanding of what the applicant did?
First of all, there's a variety of, data was collected at a variety of points throughout the study. We found a memo from the applicant's traffic engineer, which references some original counts done by a granted employee back in 2004. And our assumption is they clicked every time they saw what they thought was, quote, an aggregate truck. However, our perspective is that while you could have done that, we think it's much more defensible to hire a firm that does it as their sole job, which our counts in red are, and also be very specific on the trucks. Is the truck loaded? Is the truck unloaded? There's some additional data here in terms of directionality. We decided to compress it for presentation purposes. But again, it illustrates that for such an important issue, we believe it was studied only at a superficial level.
But also, don't you have your experience, it's my experience, that a lot of these truckers are independent truckers. So even a license plate tracking, how accurate would that be?
The way the license plate tracking works, and this is something, for example, I've been working for 15 years and my first job was to do this on a statewide level. The way license plate tracking works is you have a beginning point and an end point. You record the license plate of everyone going through your beginning point. You then have an end point. and you record the license plate of everyone going through that. Sometimes you write it down, sometimes a computer records it. However you do it, you get the records. And you simply match the records. So if someone, for example, if you recorded a license plate, let's say Fallbrook, and that same license plate shows up in San Bernardino, you can say, hey, that trip matches up. So you don't have to go back to try to find the owner of the vehicle. You don't have to do anything like that. And so that's pretty standard technology that we've been doing for decades.
But in terms of what that particular truck may be carrying, how do you make the assumption there? How do you know it's not demolition? How do you know it's not, compost?
You really don't know. One of the ways to tell, for example, is that there's some freeway overpasses going over 15, and if you were to have someone standing in the freeway overpass, they can look to see what material is in that truck.
So that's by law, it's all got to be covered.
Sure. So there's going to be some difficulties, but our main point is that there are other ways to have done this. We believe that the counting, just simply counting the trucks, is done at such a superficial level. It shouldn't be used, and it shouldn't be cited.
Well, I agree that I just couldn't figure out how the baseline could be accurate.
Right.
That's what bothered me the most.
Sure.
Thank you.
Let's see. The red here indicates that it was a license count. Is that right, correct?
No, the red is an actual count that was done by a third-party traffic data collection firm.
But using license plate?
No, actually just, again, using their same methodology.
Same methodology.
Basically, if they saw a truck that they thought was an aggregate truck, they counted it. So what this illustrates, too, is some of the variations in truck traffic, particularly under the newer conditions. Some of the counts were done back in 2004. That's what the blue line is, the green is the adjusted counts, the red were counts in 2009. So even using their methodology, we found some very substantial differences in how many trucks were on the road taking the routes they had indicated.
Okay, within the red, though, you have arrows going both ways. You can't tell how many of them were coming down into North San Diego County.
Actually, the data counted both sides of the freeways, so we have a north and south count for every count that we did. We simply just showed both arrows to make it a little easier to portray it. But we have the north and south count.
That would be of some interest, I think, so what is going south and what's going north, especially in the area of Temecula. And I was curious if you had compared these counts then with anything that they've indicated would be coming from the mine. I mean, there's trucks going to the mine, trucks coming from the mine and entering the freeway. Does this in any way relate to the trucks that would be traveling to and from the mine?
Yeah, we did. One of our concerns, too, is that there appears to be a discrepancy between how many trucks they say they're producing and how many trucks that they say they're reducing. So we think that's another potential problem, but we think that's overweighed significantly by their methodology, their approach, and how dated some of their data is as well.
Yeah, what I was looking for is I'm trying to find out, based upon trucks coming from Temescal Canyon area, for example, as opposed to trucks coming out of the Liberty Quarry mine, how do the two of those compare? Because I think there's a claim that there's a reduction,
Sure.
in air quality or pollutants due to the fact that they're going to take a lot of trucks off of the freeway.
Yeah, one of their earlier studies, which is a little hard to find, but we were able to get a copy of, was an analysis where they went and did some additional counts at some of the quarries in the Temescal Canyon area. And they were able to do some additional counts, not just at the quarries, but some of the nearby intersections. The problem is, once you get past the interchange, you really can't figure out where they're going unless you're using another methodology. So, for example, their analysis of their displacing 1,200 vehicles going to San Bernardino, we compared the counts they did. So, from what we can tell in the original study, they estimated about 800 truck trips a day come from Temescal Canyon. And that's a combination of counts they did at some driveways and some adjacent areas. Yet they then claim they're reducing 1,200 truck trips going into San Bernardino. Our perspective is that a lot of that traffic instead of San Bernardino appears to be coming from Temecula. But again, we don't know because we don't know where they start and end.
My concern is I would be interested in the net benefit, if there is one.
Sure.
When you compare the Liberty Quarry trucks, whichever direction they're going, and the ones coming from Temecula Canyon.
Right.
Because I think that's the claim that, you're going to get better air quality because there will be less trips from Temecula Canyon into northern San Diego County.
Sure, and our concern with doing that is that there are certain of those, based on some previous testimony, we expect a lot of the activity to continue. So we think that the true apples to apples comparison is to find a site for another quarry, a new quarry, and say there could be a quarry here, there could be a quarry in San Diego, there could be a quarry somewhere else, and calculate the regional VMT from all of those, and that's a true comparison. When I've been involved in previous studies where we're being asked to assess regional VMT benefits, that's exactly what we've done. I worked on a study for US EPA where they asked us that exact same question for a project, and we ended up consulting with an economist, finding alternative sites that were feasible, and calculating the VMT and looking at the reduction. That was a true reduction. I simply don't think that there's enough data out there to be able to conclude that there's a truck trip reduction or not. And since there is no data, there is no good data, and there are no good conclusions, it shouldn't be cited and it shouldn't be relied upon.
Okay, thank you.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
So what I'm hearing you say is there needs to be a better study, and the methodology should be what?
The methodology should be as follows. They need to find, first of all, they need to get a better understanding of the existing aggregate truck travel patterns. We believe the best way to do that is license plates. An alternative way of doing that is surveys. That will tell you the origin destinations for trucks in this corridor. Secondly, they need to find realistic alternative sites, and they need to match up those same origin destinations with both Liberty Quarry and those alternative sites. And that will give you a true change in VMT and a true truck mile reduction if that were done.
And the data needs to be collected. It needs to be fresh data.
Yes.
Right.
Let's see. I do have one more. What do you think the effect of our current economic situation is on the number of truck trips? I mean, we're almost in a construction standstill now, if you want to look at it that way.
Yeah, and it's certainly, we've seen, just by comparing the actual truck data that was collected, again, the blue to red comparison, there's a reduction. But I would also offer that we see certain, as traffic forecasters, certain macroeconomic forecasters where the level of growth that was anticipated in Riverside County is not the same as it always was, the level of growth in Orange County. We don't know if the level of activity will ever be what it was like in 2004, 2005 again. Maybe it's depressed now. Maybe this is the new normal. I don't know, I hope not, but it's possible. But similar to the economic analysis, a proper study would lend itself to what we call sensitivity testing. So for example, say, based on the current data, if there is a reduction or there is no reduction, it's this. If truck traffic increases from its current level by 20%, it could be that the change could be this. So that's illustrative, and that's a good item of disclosure. But it's almost impossible to do that with the data you have now, because again, you don't know where the trucks really are going and coming from and going to.
That would give you a little better feeling for what happens in terms of economic growth if we get back into some sort of a business cycle that makes sense.
Yeah, we would agree with that approach.
Thank you. I guess that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to take a not less than 5-minute break.
It's easy, though. Great.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.